In the early 17th century, the North Atlantic coastal region of America was inhabited by various societies of Algonquian-speaking peoples. Pequots, Wampanoags, and Narragansetts, among others, farmed, fished, and hunted along the coast and amidst the abundant lakes and streams of these northern woodlands. In a village by the sea, Patuxet Indians had long since done the back-breaking work of clearing fields for the cultivation of corn. They were no strangers to agriculture, nor to Europeans.
Fishermen and traders had been plying the coasts of New England for a good time. The French had been in contact with Indian peoples on the St. Lawrence River in the 1530s who were holding beaver pelts up ready to trade, so they'd already traded with other people. One of the byproducts of that, of course, is that contact with Europeans brings Indian people into contact with European diseases. In the period roughly 1616 to 1619, the coast of New England had been hit, and hit hard, by an epidemic. We're not exactly sure what it was, but it resulted in some fairly massive depopulation on the coast of New England, so that by the time the Pilgrims actually arrive, they find an area of the world that has been recently cleared. And the Pilgrims attribute this to the work of God, clearing the way for his chosen people.
They fell upon their knees and blessed ye God of heaven, who had brought them over ye vast and furious ocean.
The Plymouth colony was a colony of Puritan exiles who came to the New World as a way to escape the persecution of reforming evangelicalism in 17th century England. And the Puritans who came to Plymouth colony shaped their society in terms of what they wished to achieve in the Old World.
Ye whole country, full of woods and thickets, represented a wild and savage hue.
The Pilgrims believed that nature should be improved, that God had told them that the land should be taken care of and everything should be under the rule and control, and they should civilize it. When the colonists arrived here, they looked on their maps and saw that Plymouth was about level with Portugal. They were rather surprised that they had very severe winters, in their minds, and very hot summers. And they put this down to the fact that nobody had civilized this area. And they felt sure that once they had cleared the woods and made it look like a good European country, that the climate would modify.
But the climate did not cooperate, and the Pilgrims' first winter proved to be quite difficult. In the spring, Native Americans rescued the Pilgrims. Squanto, who had learned English after being kidnapped by a British sea captain as a boy, was essential to the colony's survival. He had escaped from slavery and eventually found his way back across the ocean, only to find that everyone in his village had died of disease. Perhaps because he was alone in the world, Squanto was eager to throw in his lot with the Pilgrims. He served as their translator, guide, and ambassador to neighboring tribes.
The person who was in charge in this area was Massasoit. When the people settled in Plymouth, which was a place where everybody either died or fled, he came and they signed a treaty. Now, one reason they signed this treaty of friendship was that with all these deaths, the Wampanoag position was suddenly very much weaker than their neighboring Narragansett people. We assume that Massasoit saw the English as a card in his hand to basically remain independent.
But even with Massasoit's assistance, the colonists continued to struggle, much to the dismay of their investors back in England. And despite a steady trickle of new settlers, Plymouth remained a backwater colony. Although their colony faded into obscurity, the Pilgrims' mythological status only grew with time.
When this nation was beginning, we needed a past that was separate from England. And to do that, you had to sort of find a beginning point. Where did America begin? And they decided to begin here in Plymouth. Why not Jamestown, which was earlier? Well, most of the people writing about history in the 18th century were New Englanders. So they picked their own origins. Plymouth was sort of pleasant and non-threatening. I mean, there were all families coming. It wasn't just adventurers, nor was it wealthy people. It was a legitimately sympathetic, empathetic story. The little ship coming over against all its dangers, and actually people surviving, and it became the one symbolic version of settling of English North America.
The God of Israel is among us. He shall make us a praise and glory, that men shall say of succeeding plantations, the Lord make it like that of New England. 10 years after the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth, a group of Puritan merchants and gentlemen obtained a royal charter for the Massachusetts Bay Company that authorized them to colonize and conduct trade in New England.
The end is to improve our lives, to do more service to the Lord. We must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us.
Puritans felt some type of obligation to historic Christianity, to demonstrate historic Christianity, what they thought was the pure religion. And this was a matter of a covenant, but they were always woefully aware of their humanness, their limitations, or their sinfulness. They weren't perfectionists, but they wanted to move towards it and demonstrate to the world what God could do through people who were deeply committed to living what they deemed to be the holy life. They were very earthy people. They knew how to have fun. These people, they struggled every day. They worked, they drank, they played. They focused on holy living, but often they were sometimes far less than that.
John Winthrop's vision for his society as the governor of Massachusetts Bay was an almost utopian one, in the sense that he believed that Boston would be a city on a hill and that all the world would look at it. What he didn't really understand was that many Puritans came to the New World knowing what they disliked in the old, but not always understanding what they wanted in the new. And when they came to the New World, they oftentimes discovered that while they had gathered together as dissenters in the Old World to flee Anglican intolerance, they realized that in the New World they didn't really think exactly alike on a wide range of issues. And all of these issues brought turmoil to a colony that seemed to be an almost utopian adventure.
Those who deviated from the mainstream, like the minister Roger Williams, found themselves at odds with the colony's leadership.
John Winthrop really looked with anticipation at the arrival of Williams. You know, he had a tremendous reputation in England, and he thought that Williams would be, really contribute to the success of the Holy Experiment in Massachusetts Bay. But when Williams arrives, he's critical of everything.
He didn't actually think that the government should have anything to do with religion because he worried that government would corrupt religion. And therefore, he wanted a kind of hands-off policy. The trouble with that was that that opened up religion to any point of view. And in the 17th century Massachusetts, that kind of toleration was not desired by John Winthrop and by others. The colony couldn't tolerate him, and they banished him to what was then Rhode Island.
Meanwhile, the authority of the Puritan leadership was also being challenged from a different quarter.
Women in the Puritan community were basically women in a European community. The standards for women were old and traditional. But there is an extra problem in the Puritan community that they never really dealt with very well. All souls are equal, but all people are not. But the implication of the idea that all souls are equal before God means that some women and in particular, of course, Anne Hutchinson and people like that, took this logic and extended it far more than the Puritan leaders would like, and got in trouble for it.
Anne Hutchinson was an exceptionally articulate, intelligent, and learned woman whose views about religion ran counter to those of the ministers she herself followed. She clearly believed that she could speak with God herself, and when she gathered listeners, including men, in her home on weeknights to gloss the sermons of Boston's leading ministers, Boston's clerical establishment and its political establishment couldn't tolerate such work from a 17th century woman.
John Winthrop, governor of the colony and Hutchinson's nearest neighbor, filed charges against her.
Anne Hutchinson, your behavior is immoral, a thing not tolerable, nor comely in the sight of God, nor fitting for your sex. Is it not true that you have been keeping 2 public lectures a week in your home?
It is true.
Is it not true that your meetings are a promiscuous and filthy coming together of men and women without distinction or relation of marriage?
I call them not, but if they come, I may instruct them.
Yet you show us not a rule of God.
Must I show my name written in the scriptures?
They would try to reason, and that's just an aspect of you know, the Puritans, I think, that people don't appreciate. They believed in the power of reason. And so one of the ways in which they tried to enforce community standards was to reason with dissidents. And that would be a rather elaborate process sometimes, and would take quite a while.
Do you repent of your foul and damnable heresies?
I know only that God can come into a person's heart.
I am persuaded the revelation you bring forth is a delusion. Therefore, I do cast you out of the church. I do deliver you to Satan. And from this time forth, you are to be as a heathen and leper.
After her banishment, Hutchinson eventually settled on a farm in New York where she continued to conduct discussion groups. In 1643, she and most of her family were killed by Indians. When the news reached Boston, many of her former neighbors interpreted her death as an indication of God's wrath. Winthrop even published a pamphlet in which he described her as the American Jezebel who had gotten what she deserved. Relations among European colonists and Indian peoples were never simple. Their lives intersected in many ways, both peaceful and violent, and between these very different cultures was often a deep experience of both attraction and repulsion.
I think it sometimes is hard for us to appreciate the sheer element of shock and strangeness that simply must have confronted these people when they first stepped out of their boats and onto the shores of this unfamiliar land. One of the first shocks was simply confronting this, as they saw it, this deep and almost impenetrable wilderness. And wilderness is a word that is just full of their own sense of wonderment and strangeness and fear. The other major element of the encounter experience was, of course, the encounter with very unfamiliar, very different kinds of people, the people who populated this wilderness, the Native American people, or the Indians, as they came to call them. The Indian people of northeastern North America in that time period had a long-standing tradition around the taking of captives in warfare. So one of the things that inevitably happened in the at least occasional outbreaks of full-fledged warfare with Indians was that some colonists were taken captive. And this was distressing not just on the obvious personal level, losing a family member, a friend, a member of one's own community, a neighbor, and so forth and so on, but also because it seemed to symbolize and epitomize the larger danger that the whole colonizing project faced. They were coming to civilize, to tame the wilderness and civilize the savage people they found here. And yet there was always this worry that maybe the effects, the changes would reverse themselves and go in the opposite direction. It got worse when it turned out that some of the people who were taken away as captives never came back, and some indeed chose never to come back. Now, a colonist who was captured and then chose to stay among the savages and become savage seemed to me to epitomize a kind of fundamental issue that runs all through colonial history, really from the beginning to the end. Are we civilizing them and changing them, or are they changing us in the long run?
One man who witnessed the profound changes brought about by the English-Indian encounter was Metacomet, who became leader of the Wampanoags in the 1660s. He remembered when his father, Massasoit, had first come to the aid of the Pilgrims at Plymouth.
The English who first came to this country were but a handful of people, forlorn, poor, and distressed. My father was then sachem. He relieved their distress in the most kind and hospitable manner. He gave them land to plant and build upon. They flourished and increased.
The impression is often given in our history books that the Pilgrims arrive and then almost immediately there's conflict and warfare with Indian peoples. But there are long periods during the 17th century where Indian people are coexisting and cooperating with English people, and where their presence is actually assisting the development of English settlement. They're often trading, and there are the beginnings of what one might almost describe as kind of lively interethnic communities. The New England that's developing in the 17th century, a New England of almost shared lives to some degree between Indians and English, is in many ways extremely vulnerable, because on the one hand, ingrained in many of the English reactions to Indians is that these people are actually less than human beings. They are not English, they are not civilized, they are very often regarded as savages, people whose right to the land is somewhat tenuous, because the English, as Christian, civilized people, have a claim to the land to build a new society on the land.
As the English population increased, demanding ever more land, Indian peoples were squeezed tighter and tighter.
By various means, they got possessed of a great part of his territory, but he still remained their friend until he died. Soon after I became sachem, they disarmed all my people. Our land was taken. I am determined not to live until I have no country.
In the 1670s, Metacomet, whom the English know as King Philip, heads a war of Indian resistance, we might even call it a war of Indian independence, against the English. That's a war that the Indians very nearly win. It's a war that costs New England, Puritan New England, very heavily, until they finally manage to defeat King Philip's forces, and the Indian peoples of central and southern New England are defeated, dispersed, and English power is reaffirmed in that area.
King Philip lost the war and his life. After his death, the citizens of Plymouth Colony cut off his head and stuck it on a pike. Just 5 years after Metacomet and his people rose up against English settlers in the Northeast, a similar action took place in the Southwest. In the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, native peoples of the Santa Fe region overthrew the Spanish who had occupied their land for 80 years. The Pueblos, who lived in scattered villages, had been forced to pay tribute to the Spanish crown through their labor and to submit to forced conversions. Their population was steadily declining as a result of exploitation and disease. But in the summer of 1680, the Pueblos overcame the distance and language barriers that divided them and mounted a coordinated surprise attack that temporarily destroyed the Spanish colony. A dozen years passed before Spain was able to reconquer the Pueblos' adobe villages.
The apparition did again set upon me in a most dreadful manner. She appeared to me only in her shift and nightcap, and brought a little red book in her hand, urging me vehemently to write in her book. And because I would not yield to her hellish temptations, she threatened to tear my soul out of my body.
In 1692, between February and September, 150 citizens of Salem, Massachusetts were accused of being witches. 80% of those accused were women, most over the age of 40. In trials presided over by religious leaders, 19 were found guilty and hanged. 2 dogs were even executed as accomplices.
The fear of witches, perhaps even some practice of witchcraft by believing individuals, existed in 17th century Massachusetts just as it did in 17th century Virginia. But in Massachusetts, the colony experienced significant political turmoil, significant straying from an old dream about what the colony was going to be and how it should be constituted. And New Englanders didn't have, or didn't choose to have, many ways to explain the decline of what they thought was their original society. And New Englanders simply scapegoated. That is, they looked for people to blame. And who to blame if young girls desire wealthy husbands and attractive husbands rather than sturdy Puritan churchmen? Who to blame but witches, people who work with the devil to plant illicit ideas in the minds of young girls.
On March 19, 1692, the accusers named Rebecca Nurse, a 71-year-old bedridden great-grandmother. When friends entered Rebecca's house to tell her the news, she responded like a devout Puritan.
Surely what sin hath God found out in me, unrepented of, that he should lay such an affliction upon me in my old age?
On March 24, Rebecca Nurse was subjected to a public examination, during which her young accusers put on quite a show.
Have you seen this woman hurt you?
Yes, this morning she beat me.
Goody Nurse, what do you say to it?
I can say before my eternal Father I am innocent and clear and have not been able to get out of doors these 8 or 9 days. Did you not bring the black man with you? Did you not bid me tempt God and die?
If you confess and give glory to God, I pray God clear you if you be innocent. If you be guilty, discover you. Therefore, give me an upright answer. Have you any familiarity with these spirits?
No, I have none but with God alone.
Even though 40 of Rebecca's neighbors signed a petition vouching for her character and the jury found her innocent, the decision was reversed when her accusers began to fly into fits yet again. Despite energetic protests from her children, Rebecca Nurse was ultimately hanged on July 19. With the cooling hand of autumn, the hysteria began to subside. Members of the jury signed a statement of regret. Those still awaiting trial were released, and some of the accusers confessed that they had given false testimony. Reaction to the excesses of Salem helped to loosen the Puritans' once iron grip upon their society. By 1700, the colony was virtually secularized, and the courts came to be controlled by the crown rather than the church. But the Salem witch hunt remains one of the more powerful cautionary tales in the historical record.
Ruth Putnam has informed me that there is a black man whispering in your ear at this very instant.
One of the most famous recreations we have is Arthur Miller's play, The Crucible. Arguably, I think, one of the great American plays of the 20th century, which is about the Salem witchcraft at one level, at the ostensible level, but at a deeper level is about the mid-20th century in American life, the Red Scare of the late 40s and early 50s, McCarthyism.
I am not and never have been a...
And I think that's a fair analogy. I think the impulses which fueled the specific witchcraft accusations at Salem in the 1690s appear in other ways. The impulses appear, although they come out in different ways at later points in American history.
The Puritans nobly fled a land of despotism to a land of freedom, where they could not only enjoy their own religion, but could prevent everybody else from enjoying his.
The Puritans' political power eventually waned. However, Puritan values continue to permeate American culture.
So many aspects of our culture where you could see that Puritan influence. Our constitutional system, for instance, that's a Puritan document through and through. We assume that people are basically selfish, basically evil, and we write into our constitutional framework ways of limiting abuse, a potential for abuse. Our expectations of our leadership. We kind of have a notion of morality and modesty, and we're Puritans through and through. I mean, it's really interesting. We're a nation of prudes.
The Puritan legacy in America has been overemphasized and underemphasized at the same time. We overemphasize the degree to which Puritanism represents the foundation of religion in American society. It does not, it did not. There were many other religions that came to the British colonies in the 1620s, 30s, and 40s, along with the Puritans. And so the Puritans represent only one strain. At the same time, some of the Puritans, particularly John Winthrop, did introduce a certain kind of vision, a certain kind of idealism, some of whose elements are important in shaping American society. A vision of really wonderful goals about the nature of community. The Puritans placed a very valuable emphasis on belonging, on the nature of community. And in that regard, the Puritans were idealistic, even if we might look askance on at least many of their ideals.